Welcome to Dementia-Friendly Prince George's County, Maryland Northern Sector webinar series for caregivers. Today's topic is Safety Behind the Wheel, sponsored by Prince George's County Government and the Department of Family Services.
Hi everyone, welcome to our presentation. My name is Christine Bitzer. I'm a social worker. I've been a care manager for the past 10 years and I've presented here before, so I want to say thank you all for having me back to talk about tonight's topic. A little bit about me before I get started, so you know who's presenting to you and what my qualifications are. As I said, I'm a social worker by background. I've been in aging and healthcare for all of my career. And for the past 10 years, I've worked for an organization called Seabury Resources for Aging, and I've been with their care management program. And in care management, we essentially help people navigate through aging and the systems, put a plan in place, handle crises, things like that. But part of my role is also being able to present to you all on topics of interest. And tonight I'm here to talk about safety behind the wheel. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started on that. So I know one of the main concerns that I hear when I answer our information line is, is it safe to let mom and dad still drive, or my loved one, my spouse? When do I know it's time? And sometimes people are calling about themselves as well. What I want to do in this presentation is talk through that a little bit about what driving means to us as a people, as a culture, and then also talk about ways that we can make it a little bit safer for ourselves. And if the keys need to be taken away, how do we do that in a respectful and dignified manner? Okay, so to start us off, I just have a few questions that I want us to consider. Okay, so when should you stop driving? That's the typical question that I hear from people. How do I have that conversation? And when should I think about changing my own driving habits? So these are kind of the questions that we want to answer. But then let me ask you this question as somebody who's about to perhaps consider talking about this with a parent or a loved one. Do you have a driver's license? How long have you had that license? I have been driving since I was 15 with my permit, since I was 16, of course, by myself. So that's getting to be more years driving than not driving. I haven't done the math on that, but I'm pretty sure I'm past that point. And then I guess the last question is, do you think you're a good driver? I don't know if you all have seen some of I think it was last year, Allstate had a commercial about good drivers, and it asked that a very question. It said, are there good drivers out there? And the answer was something like, well, there are wives. And it showed the picture of the wife, doing something that the husband didn't really think she should be doing. And then there are husbands, the exact same thing. And then there are father-in-laws. And of course, the father-in-law thought that they were all terrible drivers and he was the best driver out there. So most of us, if we continue driving, tend to think that we're good drivers. At least, otherwise, I hope we think we're good drivers. Otherwise, why are we on the road? So with that in mind, I think this is a key message that I want you to receive through this, that cutting down or stopping driving is an extremely personal decision. That question about when should I stop driving It's a very unique response for each individual. There's no specific age that we can stop driving or have to stop driving. My 70-year-old father is very different from the 70-year-old client that I just met the other day. Two completely different stories. Completely unexpected for both of them, I'm sure, but they are not equal. They do not have the same abilities as one another. The only thing they have in common is that they were born the same year. So there is no specific age. When we talk about giving up driving, this is a loss for people. And we're going to talk about kind of what goes into that, but it can be very emotional. The reason why this is a scary topic for us to bring up as caregivers is because we know there's going to be a visceral reaction to it, or we think there's going to be a visceral reaction to it. And it may also be that that's how we would respond. So we're kind of imposing our own value judgments on driving before we even know what the other individual is thinking. But there can often be a grief process. And in fact, even for somebody who's given up driving or given up some of it, they've probably already processed some of this. For some people, this can really be perceived as a personal admission that they're getting older, that they aren't functioning as well as they used to. And that can be really hard for any of us to admit. There's also a practical side to this. Our country is built around roads primarily, especially if you live out in suburbia. Not all of us can live in the city and have access to good transportation. And certainly it depends upon the city you live in. So there's a practical aspect to this as well. So to us, it may be a safety hazard. We view it as something that they could hurt themselves, or worse yet, they could hurt somebody else. But to the person you're talking to the older adult, presumably, that you're talking to, this can be so much more than just a set of keys and a car. So let's talk about that for a minute. I asked when you all started to drive, and as I mentioned, I started to drive when I could. It may be a surprise to some of you and old news to others of you, but the age limit was only imposed in the 1920s. So for some of our older adults, that was a new thing for them. They were already beyond 16 and had been driving before then. So that's kind of a mind shift that, someone like me, I've always known that there's a driver's age limit. But for some of our older adults, there wasn't a driver's age limit. And even with that driver's age, or the moment when you can get your driver's license, for them, it was irrelevant. The other thing that this country was built on was farms and rural areas. And even my cousins who are the same age as I am, they were driving the tractors before they were 16. They had to. It was a matter of keeping the family business going. And even my nephews, who are much younger than me, um, their parents helped work at a campground. And so they were always driving golf carts around, driving ATVs around, perhaps not long before they were 16, but definitely before they had reached the driving age. The other thing is that age requirement is actually set by the state. So everything is set. It's just we've all chosen 16. It is a symbol of independence, right? This is the time when we actually get to get out from our parents' house, and not just out as far as we could run or as far as we could bike, but the possibilities are now endless. And an hour on a highway, you You can get at least 70 miles or away, 65 miles, depending upon what the speed limit is. It's a symbol of control and responsibility. Um, the reason why I got my license so quickly was because I was the oldest and there were two kids still in middle school. So it became my responsibility to get my sister and I to high school and to get us to the sporting life that we had. So again, some of this is responsibility. It's how we get to our jobs. Um, it's also a big status symbol here. We were talking about this program, earlier in the month when we were discussing kind of what we would talk about, and I already had the status symbol placed in it, but it recalled to my mind that back in my parents' age, you didn't just get a car. Um, I know many people, not everybody, but many people get a car. I got a hand-me-down car because my dad had so many brothers and sisters, but certainly in his family, there you did not get a car. So the purchase of your car meant that you had worked really hard. And there isn't a picture of my dad leaning on his car. There's a picture of my uncle leaning on his car. But the other thing is, and there is a picture of my dad with this, you took care of your car. It was your responsibility. My dad's first car that he bought, he rebuilt that engine at least twice. And in total, I know there are pictures of me helping him clean oil off the various engine parts as he was putting them back together because they had crossed over the 100,000 or 200,000 mile limit. And that first car that he bought, it didn't leave our driveway until the bottom had rusted out. And I remember driving to or riding the last year when I was a freshman in high school. It was the last year that he drove me to school, and I could see the snow flipping through the bottom of the car because it had rusted out. Um, Not that we were about to fall out, but that was about the time that left. So this is something huge to our older adults. The other thing now is we're driving a lot longer than we used to. Um, so that's also something different that has changed. Um, the National Highway and Transportation Administration indicated that 19% of drivers were 65 and older. And as the population gets older, that's the way it's going to be. Again, we covered some of this, but our reasons to drive are very important. And we've seen just in the summer with COVID how isolated we all are because we can't go anywhere. Even if we wanted to drive somewhere, we couldn't. But it does show us how connected we are. A car keeps us connected socially. I loved living in a little city where I could walk to almost everything, but that's not typical. In order to get a bigger place, we had to move out, and this is the same further out of the city. Um, so we can't just walk to places where we need to frequently. Uh, our errands and tasks are often connected with roads and driving. Work is rarely in there. And for individuals who have retired, it's not just work, it's whatever they view as work. So that volunteer group that they go to, the community center that they go to, the shopping, the medical appointments, they all are out of pocket. They can't just walk there. So that means that transportation is a huge issue for many older adults. And we know that things like public transportation, as good as it might be, it doesn't always get out there. And for example, something happens, a snow day, your bus routes are cut out, COVID. I just, I had completely forgot because I never can ride public transportation to get to my work, that some of the metro stations were still closed and the last ones just reopened recently. So imagine if somebody's trying to cut off that lifeline, essentially. One of the negatives about driving is how commonplace it is, um, how much we depend upon it, and how much it becomes a habit. So think about a drive that you regularly do. How many people have arrived at your destination and you have no idea how you got there? I mean, you know how you got there, but you can't really recall many details about that drive because you were just so deep in thought, or maybe the radio station was on and they were playing good music, or it was NPR and they had a really compelling piece on. We just automatically do things now, and sometimes that is very dangerous because our mind, there probably were things that happened, but we didn't see it. It's estimated that we make about 20 decisions per mile, and we often have about less than half a second to avoid a collision. Um, I used to have some of these conversations before I was a social worker with one of my friends in college, and just the staggering amount. I don't know if some of you can recall back to when you learned how to drive, or perhaps when you taught your children how to drive, or somebody else how to drive. But I remember distinctly the first time my parents needed me to go like, 45 miles an hour. And I thought that was way too fast. I couldn't believe that something was moving that fast. I obviously do not get off on that kind of adrenaline. Um, so, but we adjust to it. I mean, it wasn't but a day later that that was not a problem for me. We easily get into routines and habits to the point where how many of us are totally bored at the stoplights and you see everybody checking their text messages and their phones. Hopefully they stop when the light turns green, but I know I've seen many a person, and I've also been guilty of, oh, let me see what that text message was while the light is red. We just think we have all the time in the world now. So some of the good and the bad about older adults and driving, they do actually have some of the lowest percentage of unintentional deaths due to motor vehicle accidents. They aren't too bad of drivers. They have the lowest crash rate per licensed vehicle. Unfortunately, there do seem to be a decent amount of older adults who do get hurt. The CDC had indicated that there were about 15 older adults and 15 killed and 500 injured in daily car crashes. So there are about 13 older adults, are about 13% of the population, but they're suffering about 15% of traffic fatalities. So there's a lot of risk in there. Some of the things that we need to consider when we're talking about the impact of safety and some common issues are the age of the car. And you might say, I just told you about the rusting out bottom in one of my father's first, if not very first car, at least the first one from his marriage. That's definitely a danger. And certainly we have had some clients, and I know of older adults who or families who specifically buy their parent or loved one the latest model because it'll have all the whistles and bangs. That's not necessarily the best idea either. I mean, theoretically it is, but some of those new technologies may also be a detriment. Again, riding in a car for the first time, I know my parents, I believe they turned off their, they got a new car probably about a year ago, and I think they turned off the side view cameras because it was just so distracting when the car like shook to warn them that something was not quite right, that almost caused an accident in itself. So they just went ahead and turned that off. So when I say age of the car, there's the obvious unsafe cars that just don't have the technology that we'd like them to have, but then there's also how well does somebody adjust to the latest and greatest technology, and is there really something that could be met in the middle? As we get older, we have a lot of changes in our bodies, and our sensory limitations certainly change. So one of the things that happens with our vision is it starts to narrow in scope a little bit. So if you hold your hands out, straight on either side of you, you should generally have a 360 view with your peripheral vision and be able to kind of see when things move. But that slowly narrows in. Just through regular aging. So that's an issue there. Hearing, the other thing with vision is we tend to need more light, and this doubles every 13 years or so. And keep in mind when I'm talking about these visual limitations that most of us receive 85% of our information through a visual means. So that slow decreasing and the need for more light really can impact your driving. It also becomes more difficult to pick out different colors, especially from busy intersections, busy roadways. The other thing with the vision, my husband, and again, we're not older adults yet. He constantly complains to me about how everybody has their high beams on. And I constantly tell him that it's not that they have their high beams on, it's that they are in an SUV and they're a little higher than us. We also have an SUV, so we're blinding just as many people out there. But it is true that many older adults choose to stay in their sedans. They're much more comfortable that way, but the lights from the higher vehicles can cause a lot of blindness. Depth perception also deteriorates, and this not only helps us kind of gauge how far across an intersection is, but how fast someone is coming. So you can imagine how that could make somebody either slow to make that left-hand turn that you just know they could have made, or somebody who misjudges it or perhaps feels like they need to go. Hearing-wise, the exact kind of tonal location of where things like sirens fall in also happens to fall in where we lose some of our hearing, where the hearing loss array happens. So that can make it really difficult. It's not just the sirens though, but the horn on a car is meant to be a communication. And if you can no longer receive that communication, or you're not hearing it as well, it doesn't sound like it's really you that they're honking at, but it must be somebody who's honking at somebody behind you. That can be difficult and can cause issues as well. The tactile sensation, so knowing where your foot is, there are certainly things like diabetes and other diseases that can cause some of that, but also some of the normal aging, just not knowing exactly where we are. Functional decline is a big one as well. Just limited mobility. Again, having the even arthritis, moving from one pedal to the other could be difficult. I remember when I first gave this presentation, I guess it must have been some divine providence or something, because I slept horribly about a week before the presentation. And, you know, I I felt pretty good by the time I left for work and jumped in my car and had my shower and stretched out a little bit. But you know what? I got on the highway, and the moment I went to check my blind spot, that crick in my neck, oh my gosh, the pain going down my entire neck was horrible. Um, and I decided I didn't really need to change lanes at that moment in time. And I was just going to wait a few more minutes, which thankfully I tend to be a cautious driver. So I tend to like to be over in the right-hand lane. But it just made it very clear to me how something little, not sleeping well or not sleeping right, can really impact our driving. And it was startling too. I mean, I was definitely startled at that. And it was fortunately nothing happened, but unfortunately it did happen on a high speed area. Um, Cognitive impairment can also impact us. So just part of the part of our cognition also includes executive functioning, and that part of our cognition is where we plan things, where we understand we have to go through these steps, 1, 2, 3, all the way to whatever, to do something. And then also being able to carry those out and to stay attentive to each of those details and organize them so it is 1, 2, 3 and not 1, 8, 6, 5, 2, 3, or whatever. So part of that can also impact someone. Certainly, another common issue is seizure disorders. And interestingly enough, again, sometimes I think these presentations come along at just the right times. This week alone, I've talked to, 3 or 4 people who have talked to me about different seizure issues that somebody they're caring for has. Medications, the side effects of them, I believe in some of the presentations that I've been here before and also talk about how many medications our older adult population is on. And the impacts of those medications, whether they're making us drowsy, even miscalculating it, making you foggy. So it's always good to check in with your doctor or pharmacist and make sure, should I really be driving that heavy machinery? And again, I think that's something that we see on the prescription bottle, but we don't always stop to think that that means a car. So that is one thing that we really need to take a look at is, should I be driving if I'm taking this medication? And should I be driving, and if I can drive while on this medication, is there a better time to drive? And some of that is going to be noticing those impacts on yourself. But it also is talking with the pharmacist to understand, well, what am I looking at here? What are the side effects? What else might impact this? Okay. So what makes you nervous when you're driving? Is it the left-hand turns? Is it the left-hand turns across 4 lanes of traffic versus 2 lanes of traffic? The roundabouts, we've got plenty in this area. Anybody been to DuPont Circle? That one I avoid as much as possible, although in general I like roundabouts. Big trucks. Um, I know sometimes I live over in Virginia, and it's not often that I have to drive on 81, but there are plenty of trucks out there, plenty of trucks on 95 too. Nighttime driving. So many of us have issues with nighttime driving. I know that was one of the things that impacted my grandmother first and actually really scared me. I was fortunate in that my grandmother lived right down the street from one of my mother's mother lived down the street from one of my dad's sisters. So it was very nice to go to my grandmother's house because then I could definitely go to my cousins. But one night my grandmother was going to take us over there, and she got completely lost and turned around and even went up on a curb. And, by the end of it, my sister and I were saying to her, you know what, Grandma, let's go back and play a nice game of Clue. We don't need our cousins. So we didn't. And it really scared her, and it really made her very sad because she wanted to be able to take us over there. Um, right of way. How many times have you gotten somewhere and you have no idea whose right of way it is? Backing and parking, always an issue. Um, Passing people or aggressive drivers. And that's a big thing with, if somebody's driving starts seeming a little bit erratic or you're not responding as fast, that's inviting even more of those aggressive drivers today, unfortunately. So keep this in mind when we think about the fact that older adults do self-regulate. I think one of the issues with my grandmother was she wasn't really driving at night much anymore. I didn't know that. I was too young to connect that type of thing. But many older adults don't drive at night any longer. Many older adults actually go all the way around the block just to avoid a left-hand turn. And certainly, I will go quite a distance to avoid the DuPont Circle roundabout. So, we all have our little things that we avoid. I frequently hear when I go meeting new clients that they drive, but don't worry because they don't drive in rush hour and they don't drive in heavy traffic. Many people limit where they drive. And of course, the farther we drive, the more likely it is that we'll be in an accident. So the fact that people are limiting where they drive is a good thing. Just to give you some of the statistics on that, CDC said that of current drivers, about 57% of men and 81% of women reported that they avoid driving under certain circumstances, especially bad weather and nighttime driving. About a third of older men and 44% of older women reported avoiding driving in heavy traffic. And about 10% of older men and 15% of older women said they cut back due to physical problems. And of those, it was about 40% who mentioned vision. So vision is a big, big deal. And women tend to be self-regulating more than men. Again, it was never the women posing on that car. It was, except in the sexy picture type thing. But it was always the men with their new car. So I thought, you shouldn't reinvent the wheel. I pulled a couple of these things. This one particularly is from AARP, just 10 signs that it may be time for someone to stop driving. Someone who has almost crashing or frequent close calls. Again, I tend to hear from clients that it wasn't anything and they didn't really need to tell their children about it. That one, you either need to be riding in the car with them and experience that or be driving behind them. Finding dents and scrapes on the car or on some of the other areas that are close to like the driveway, so the mailbox or fences, that type of thing. We've certainly had individuals and clients who every time you meet them and you notice how scraped up the car is, and there's some good reasons for it, but then you notice that that keeps getting added to and added to. People getting lost, especially in familiar locations, like my grandmother. She was, again, this was a straight shot. I think I could have almost walked it during the daylight hours, and we live halfway across the country from my grandmother, or did. But I thought I could probably find it with maybe one wrong turn after I had to get off the main road. And I don't even know where we were that night. Having trouble when you know that somebody is having vision difficulties. Again, we talked about how big a percentage of your information comes in visually. So as we start having difficulties with this, that's definitely a time to think about just rearranging things. Following or even paying attention to traffic signals, road signs, or pavement markings. And again, I think we all have some troubles with this if we're in a new area, but if this is constantly happening and it's in an area where you are familiar with and it's not something that seems to be able to be recognized and repaired, then we have some issues here, to say the least. We talked about the fact that reaction times slow down. So it takes longer as we get older for the signal to go from your brain to your foot, to move, pick your foot up, move it over, put it back down on the brake. Again, that seems like habit and it happens like that. But when that disconnect starts happening, that reaction time gets longer and longer. And again, some of that is the distractions in the car. Maybe it's habit, maybe it's that we can no longer multitask and have both the radio on and being able to pay attention. So when we start responding, or we notice somebody's responding more slowly to unexpected situations that come up, not being able to move their feet, or, God forbid, confusing the two, that's an issue. Misjudging those gaps in traffic. I talked about this a little bit, just in not being able to perceive the depth perception anymore or understand how fast somebody is coming, and especially on highway entrance and exit ramps. Again, we kind of talked about this one a little bit, but the idea of road rage. So not the older adults road rage, although they may come home saying how stupid people are these days. But the fact that more and more people seem to be honking at them or complaining about them. Again, I touched on this just a moment ago, being easily distracted or having difficulty concentrating. And I mentioned earlier being able to turn around to check that rear view mirror while you're backing up or changing lanes. So that can be a real issue for people. And then, of course, noticing that somebody is gathering those traffic tickets and the warnings from law enforcement. The American Automobile Association also had some good questions, some of which we've already seen, but with the AARP one, but I felt there were some that were good, like the weaving or straddling the lanes. We've seen that before. when we're not sure whether the person in front of us has been drinking or what's going on, but it's worrisome for us. And if it's not worrisome for them, that's an issue. People frequently passing them, people not going the speed limit, perhaps going slower than the speed limit. Again, one of the ways that we stop that 65 miles an hour from seeming like it's 65 miles an hour is we bring it back down to the speed that we can manage. And sometimes that's just as unsafe as, as if we were trying to go faster. Do they use a co-pilot? So we've all met those individuals where the two partners are driving one another. It frequently starts as backseat driving, but as time goes on, we know more and more that this is more like reality, and this wouldn't be happening. Okay, and then also not being able to judge the road conditions. So if there's snow on the road and they're still going way too fast, or they're being overly cautious during other situations. So how do we have a conversation? Again, keeping everything that we've talked about in mind. Since driving is so crucial to many people, and it is the way that they get around, that they are socially connected, you need to have a good plan for how to replace that. How are you going to get them to where they need to go? One of the things I would certainly look at is, start with your county, talk to them about the transportation options. Almost every county, and we'll go over some, I think there's some more resources in the back here from Dementia Friendly, but certainly talk to the county about what the options are. There usually is some sort of subsidy for public transportation. There may even be options with villages. Again, villages are small groups of neighborhoods that have gotten together to provide services for one another. Usually it's a social thing, but one of the pieces is often providing transportation to medical appointments or to other appointments. So ask what those resources are and have those available even before you have the conversation. Listen to how they're feeling. So be an active listener. Reflect what you're hearing. Understand, remember that emotional piece that I talked about, and let them express it. This is probably not a one-time conversation. It should be an ongoing conversation. It should be a planning thing. Nobody likes to jump into a new transportation system without testing it out first, without understanding what the restrictions are. Metro Access is a fabulous transportation service, but I know it also has some limitations. So how do we overcome those things? So be respectful, hear the concerns. Don't be defensive. Don't become the defensive one when you're having this. And make sure that you are also being empathetic to the situation. Use key phrases like, I understand this is upsetting. And let's focus on what keeps you safe. Let's focus on what keeps all of us safe without limiting. Again, we're not trying to limit somebody. We're really just trying to keep them safe. This isn't the time for lectures or demanding. Of course, there are always situations where you do have to take away the keys right away. But what we're talking about here primarily are those conversations. Be objective on it. Do a self-assessment. How do they feel about driving? What do they see as their strengths and weaknesses? And again, it may make you feel better if you know that they are actually doing more self-regulating than you think. As I mentioned, there are many older adults who do limit where they go, and maybe you don't know that yet. Um, so that's definitely something to find out. It's also good to be objective. So you have a stake in this as a spouse or a child or a caregiver. So let's take out that stake. Let's make this objective. Is there a place that you can get a driving test? And there are places that will do driving tests, which I think are great opportunities, because it also, if the person still can drive, which most frequently, usually I find when people are having this conversation, it's either way far at a point where the keys need to be taken away, or it is about one party also being concerned and just needing that reassurance. And one of the things that the driving schools, or for example, National Rehab, they have occupational therapists who do testing. They sit the older adult in their car. They go review the setup, make sure that all the mirrors are where they need to be. And there are people who don't pass that, certainly. And again, that's now taken the blame off of you. It's this OT who has now declared you unable to drive, and it's not about me, the daughter. It's about the fact that you just didn't pass this test. But it also provides the opportunity of, is there a way to adjust this? Is it that the mirrors aren't in the right place? Is it that there needs to be a height adjustment or something else made? And that's something that the occupational therapist can assist with. Again, if there are issues that you see, maybe it is talking through more self-regulations, regulating, excuse me. Of course, at the end of the day, if we do need to bring in someone, it's always a good opportunity to consider bringing in a more authoritative body. And I'm going to go into that in a minute here. So if you're concerned about that, the CDC, the American Automobile Association, and AARP all have some good driving websites. AARP even has one, I believe it's AARP, that even has one where you can do a simulation, which was kind of fun to do. Drivered.org are those PTs, or excuse me, OTs, occupational therapists, who can provide that testing. Again, it's often done, there are a couple of smaller groups that do it. NRH is the primary one around here. And for them, last time I checked, it was a little bit over $100, and it takes about 2 hours. So that's certainly an option. If you do have a concern and you feel like you need to pull someone else in, there are ways to report that in each of those 3 jurisdictions around here: Virginia, Maryland, and DC. For many of these places, it does happen upon renewal of the license, but sometimes you just can't wait for that. In Maryland, they have a whole list that you're supposed to self-report immediately. And those include such things as diabetes requiring insulin, an irregular heart rhythm or heart condition, any strokes or mini strokes or TIAs, traumatic brain injuries, and then any disorder which impacts your eyesight and really limits that. And dementia as well is also something you're supposed to report. I laugh at that because I did have to report one of my clients who then did get the self-report in the mail. And of course, she thought she was a perfect driver. So that didn't help out too much, but then once we called some individuals, we were able to kind of renew that. So it is about understanding what your jurisdiction does, but hopefully it won't get to that point. Hopefully by planning ahead and having some of these conversations before you really need them would be a good way to do this. And again, when you're talking about a lifeline that's connecting you to all of the systems, all of your medical appointments, all of your grocery shopping, all of your socialization, it is about figuring out what can replace that. And, you know, I hate to say it, but that could be a positive that COVID has granted to some people, for families who may have had concerns pre-COVID and were able to restrict, you know, assist somebody in keeping their quarantine and found some of those other methods. This could be a time of boon, if you want to call it that, where they have had to figure out some of these things. So this may be a good opportunity as we start opening things back up to make sure that some of those limitations remain, because perhaps we've figured out a safer way to do that. And I would consider that sooner rather than later, as we start opening up. And now I'm going to turn it over for a little bit of information about Dementia Friendly America.
Thank you so much, Christine, again, for presenting on such an important topic to consider and plan for as we age. I hope this was informative to anybody watching. And in addition to this video, Christine's presentation, DFA Northern Prince George's County has other helpful resources available. We have our virtual support groups. That is our caregiver support group on the first and third Wednesdays from 6 to 7. And we also have a social distancing support group first and third Thursdays, 6 to 7. If you would like more information, you can sign up for our monthly email newsletter. This includes upcoming online events, resources that may be nearby you in the Prince George's area, dementia-friendly updates, and other information. We also have a YouTube channel that you can visit with more educational videos that we've recorded in the past on topics such as becoming a dementia friend, caregiving, and other important information for those that are aging. For more information, you can also contact Sharon Johnson. Her phone number and email is there at the bottom if you have any questions or concerns or any feedback on this presentation. Oh, and one more thing. We also are providing the Prince George's County Area Agency on Aging, their phone number there for more resources, community programs that are local, and you can also visit the National Institutes of Health, the National Institutes on Aging at NIH, any clinical trials that you may be interested in hearing about for your loved one, or just hearing about different treatments and medications related to dementia or memory loss. And also, lastly, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for more information on aging and physical activity.
Okay. And my information is also up there. Christine Bitzer, my email, as well as my phone number. I know that I'll receive the feedback on this presentation, but I'm also happy to talk through any situations with somebody. The phone number that's on there is our information line and primary information and assistance line. It's the line that people come to us for care management, but primarily it's a line where people can call and ask questions. And certainly if care management is appropriate, I would make that suggestion. But in general, it is about talking through situations like this and making sure that you get back to some of these other resources if need be. So please don't hesitate to call and ask. We're all out here for you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated it and enjoyed it.